All right, here we go for the first episode of the GMG Indie Hour. Thanks everybody for suggesting this. And for those of you not in know, this was an idea that we had in one of the Monday morning hangs, where folks were suggesting some games to check out. And I thought, why don't we just make this a series? This feels like the kind of thing we should all just do together. And I would come up with a format for it and talk about what the plan was to basically, like, this is such a good idea because there are so many tabletop games out there. GMG Reviews physically can't do them all, and so many of them exist in this like digital only space that this is just a better way of doing it. Like doing it collectively as a group. The patrons can hang out, we can investigate it together, we can talk about what it looks like. More games will get the spotlight they deserve this way by basically unblocking this from the GMG review and the physical sphere that we've been stuck in, basically, which has meant that tons of these things haven't gotten the attention they got. This is super easy to do. This is a good use of Patreon funds, right? Where basically what I'm doing is this is allowing me to take the whatchamacallit, take the process that we use for things like GMG reviews, and instead of having it be like when someone sends me a physical thing, it can be whenever a patron comes across something cool and then we all get to look at it together, which I think is just a way better way of having this happen. So we're going to do two games today. We're going to establish the format today, which is one of the things that I thought was super important. And the idea is that we're going to have a patron selected game every episode. I want to do this every single week because I think this is so easy to do that this could just become the Wednesday show. And that will keep the Monday show a Monday show. And then everybody kind of has something to come and do together. And then I'm going to pick a game that I think needs more hype, or that no one's talked about or that's been overlooked. So we'll have one that's basically by patron popular demand. And then we're going to have one that is my personal, like the chef's selection, if that makes sense, right? That I pick. So I'm going to go say hi to the chat real fast just to see who's here patron wise. These patrons are, for those of you guys watching this in the future, because this will go live after the first week. The idea is, so for you guys watching this today, I'll clean this up and edit it, and then the show is going to go up. Basically last Wednesday's show goes up public the Wednesday that we record a new show. So while you guys and I are hanging out doing next week's show, it'll be a week early for patrons, and then it'll go live. And that way all these little indie games get the spotlight they deserve, but this is patron produced, and so you guys get to be a part of the show. And it's just more community and more inclusive, and this just felt like a really good way of doing it. So let's say out of the chat and see which of the lovely Clio patron producers are here, and what's been going on with everybody today. So going to the chat, who we got? I was chatting with them a minute ago. We got Mike Grimshaw's here, Brian Krantz is here, Ryan Dunphy's here, Captain Fairlight's here, Gizmo Math Boy's here. We've got the Lord Zombie Bits, Atragon X, Derek Garing's here, Nick Butler's here, Dario Hadjick's here, Malev Does Shinobi's here, and Cheeses is here. And then we got, I think that's it. Gary Lee's here, _333 is here, Jamie Whiteside's here, Matt Santiago's here, Joe Sapinski's here, and Andrew B's here. Hi, Andrew B. I hope you're feeling better, dude. I think you were the one that was sick last week. It was you or Dan. One of you guys was sick last week or had to take time off or do a meeting. I can't remember which one it was. So we're going to, this is basically just establishing the format of what we're going to look at. And last week, Jez Hunt, so this is official shout out to Jez for being the patron producer on this one. We're going to use like a vote system. So what I'd like everybody to do is, if you have a game that you guys would like to see me do this look at, and you're watching this in the future of your patron, all patrons should go to the Patreon post for this, and then in the comments below, make game suggestions. I'm going to bet that we do Trench Crusade next week because the rules are free and they're online and we can look at them together. I'm going to bet that's what's going to happen, but what I'll do is I'll collect all the suggestions underneath there, and then I'll put a poll up, and that'll be the poll for next week's game. And that lets me get in front of this basically, and then we can have this set up to, this video will be set to launch next week for everybody. And then the actual sort of like process will be established, and this will go forward into the future. So yeah, let's dive in and take a look at what we are having a look at today, which is Devilry Afoot. So like I said, Jez Hunt was the one that suggested this. This is from Irregular Wars, is the producer on this, and it's written by Nick Wright. And this is available through Wargames Vault. The link is in the video description for this, and you can check out. It comes with basically 6 different files to download. There's like a player sheet. The front and back cover of the book are separate. So if you don't want to print the covers, which is a handy feature, you can print the covers separately and then print the documents like guts and then staple it all together. It's just a nice way of doing things. And this is a miniature agnostic. So you can see here some examples of miniatures people have painted for it. A miniature agnostic witch hunting game. And my game that deserves more hype is vaguely related to this. I went with a theme here, basically. It's vaguely related to this so that we could have a sort of like a witches hunt theme for the first episode, where one is while they're hunting the witches, the other one is what happens afterwards, which I think is great. And so this is a miniature agnostic game. It's full color rulebook, but 122 pages, and it's beautifully illustrated with all these woodcuts. It's kind of laid out to look like an old time witch hunter's manual, which I really appreciate. Like with a lot of indie games, one of the first things to go with indie games is, and I can speak to this having published several, and self-published several back in the GeoCities days, back in the days before this was even really a thing. If you don't know how to lay out a book, one of the first things to go is kind of style. And what I think Nick did a really good job here with is having a nice, simple style that makes it fun to read this book, and to theme as well, but that didn't break the bank. This is a good example of like when you're doing a self-published game, the little thing you can do to make a book look attractive, but not worry about trying to go super deep into the graphic design and make it like super slick and super like modern, I guess is the word. You don't need to have like all kinds of bloats and cutouts. It can just be laid out text that's like nicely sort of formatted. It's a game that takes place as the premise of questionable notions and fears that percolated through early modern Europe were wholly justified, that ungodliness and moral corruption manifested from an evil that could be countered with religious fervor. So basically it's saying that the witches were all real. And it led to the execution of some 50,000 people, roughly 80% of whom were women. Most of them were accused of being socially marginalized and otherwise expendable. So the sort of like core tenets of the game are, this was bad. We're playing a game about it, but yeah, this was a friggin' horrible time in history. But imagine if the witches were actually real and got to have their revenge on the evil hunters. So by default, games of Devilry Afoot are assumed to take place during the Devil's Hour witching hour. So this is the first sort of like game mechanic I wanted to call it in here that I thought was pretty cool. Is that it's a bit like the Batman miniature game. If you ever played that, every game of Batman takes place at night, so it's assumed to be dark outside, and that's why line of sight's always restricted. And the witching hour here is between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m., 12 hours after the death of Jesus of Nazareth. So it's this unholy hour, basically. And that several tenants color the rules. Despite the moonlight, vision, lines of sight are hampered by the darkness. Shadows should be dangerous places. Generally speaking, the monsters know where the humans are, even when they can't see them. So, like, humans need line of sight, the monsters don't, because they have some kind of supernatural senses. Monsters are not always rational, and irrational creatures can make irrational actions. If God-fearing souls are asleep in their beds, what past traumas and dark secrets drive the hunters into the dark places to face the devil's minions? Heroes they might be, but flawed they certainly are. So you're not the good guys you think you are, is another core principle here. And players are encouraged to be proactive in building a narrative around their actions and the monster's actions and responses. I really like this, that they put like a design sort of tenets thing right here at the front of the book before they get into the rules, because I think it adds context. When you're writing a game, one of the hard things to get from just laying the rules out as a, like, here's how you move, here's how you touch stuff. Like, those are the core tenets of like any tabletop miniature game, is these peons represent you on the battlefield or your units or whatever. And then here's my rules for traversal and for interaction. How do I interact with the environment and the other models? How do I traverse the environment that you're in? You don't get context without that. So laying at the beginning of like, here's my intent as a game designer, here's where you're supposed to be and how you're supposed to be feeling, is a really smart sort of like just jumping off point. And for an indie game, it's very clever. It's a well-written thing to like add in there at the beginning to kind of give the reader later on like these little ahas, and you're you're not having to like over explain your rule mechanic then to be like, and remember it's dark so they can't see this far. Like you front loaded all that. So saying like your line of sight's only 12 inches unless stated otherwise has like context all of a sudden. Core principles: hunters, followers, innocents, and dogs. And that's just who people are: humans and monsters. More beautiful woodcuts. I'm assuming all of these are like historically like significant. I don't know what they are, but I love this art. This is so cool. And again, it's a clever way for an indie designer doing like a period piece like this that has all kinds of very cool, but obviously like royalty free art because it's a piece of history like this is just a great, like, it's a great way of getting your illustrations and having beautiful illustrations, but not having to pay for them. And that sounds bad in some ways, but it's not, because it's just things that exist in the public domain and are super cool. And this, I don't think it's bad because it raises the awareness that this stuff exists, that this history is fantastical and insane. Like, this thing happening, man. Like, there's a demon here, like, just talking to this guy. And, like, just all kinds of insane, like, the witch trial stuff is just insane. It's D10 based, some rules for rerolls, being in base contact when you fight. Some core mechanics for random direction, so like using the D10 for a random, like the point of the D10 is the direction, the number is where you go, front and rear arcs for your line of sight. The core mechanics are relatively simple. What do you need to play? 28 mil models, and this has definitely spawned lots of conversion stuff. There's tons of beautiful miniatures here people have used for Devilry Afoot. Everything from, like, if you look at old Mordheim miniatures, right, getting used quite often. Lots of indie stuff here for the monsters, which I think is very cool. I love this little like headless lady, just random witch hunter inspector. And then like just even more fun things like these little red cap gnomes. A bunch of, I believe these are blood and plunder minis that have been used for this, like plastic blood and plunder minis. Just, it lets people kind of like mine the world of like cool historical independent stuff, but give it a bit of flavor. Like these bag on the head monsters. Just tons of cool stuff in here. And if you want to get inspired, like once you look at the rule book, just a quick Google search for like Devilry Afoot miniature games, you're gonna find all kinds of cool like sort of inspirational like models of what people have already done. So the game is fairly established, and good places to go to check out more about it or see it played, like necessarily like played, but like pictures of it being played would be places like Let Adventure Forum, where it's fairly popular. And obviously YouTube, you can see some reviews and mechanical stuff as well. So the whole premise of the game is that you're going on a hunt, and Devilry Afoot takes place over a number of turns. During each turn, all the models on the table will have the opportunity to be activated one or more times. The order of which models are activated is determined randomly by drawing initiatives from a token bag. So it uses that bolt action / Judge Dredd. I think even the old Marvel / DC game from Night Models had that too, if I remember correctly, because we played a bunch of that, where you pull your activation tokens from a bag, and it adds a little bit of like RNG to activations. And then once you're out, the remaining models will go until everybody's activated. This is basically your whole like your whole sort of like core mechanical stuff explained. Most people can use 2 actions per turn, like a move touch, you know what I mean? It uses that kind of like a base system. And as far as the like core like stat line and stuff like that, it's relatively simple. We've got 4 main stats, which is your resolve, your move, your attack, your shoot, and your wounds. So resolve is like all of your mental stats kind of bundled together. Attack is when you're fighting in melee. Move is how you move around the table. And then your shooting is, you're using a musket or a pistol or something like that to attack with. And those are also representative usually of your actions. So you can attack in melee, that counts as an action. Shooting counts as an action. Moving counts as an action. And then your defense is not a stat that you really need to know because it's just always a 6+. It's a 50-50, which is on D10, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Wounds will be adding like penalties, so the more hurt you get, the more you'll become like less capable of action, right? So every wound that you suffer, you get a -1 penalty to rolling for activation tests and resolve tests because you're fighting the wounding. If you go to 0 wounds, you're removed from action. And of course, there's campaign rules and stuff too. It has some fairly robust like character creation rules, where it's sort of archetype based, which I like. You have sort of your guys are kind of their job or like their social standing, which I think for a game set in this period is really cool because that would dictate sort of who you are in the game. And it's a way of adding feeling to the game. So being a good man or good wife, a gentleman, you could be a religious person, you could be a scholar. I love this Plague Doctor miniature. It's a really nice model. I don't think it's credited though. Cross Lances, I think that's the creator. Soldier, a follower. These are like your minor hanger-on sort of characters. And then you have traits and skills. And then basically just add bonuses or penalties to your tests for your various stats. And once you put together your little group of hunters, then you get to go off and have adventures. And like I said, this is not going to be like a full like GMG review or like how to play. This is more an overview of like what the game is and what it looks like. Skills, like being an apothecary. And then we get into your secrets. So remember when I said you're going to be bad? You're going to have like things that are wrong with you. You're not necessarily going to be great people. In a very reminiscent to like Warhammer Fantasy roleplay thing, everybody has a flaw. And in fact, this came up in a lot of indie games recently. We have it in Forbidden Psalm too. Everybody has a perk and a flaw. Well, you're going to have a flaw. Things like you can be a backslider, doubting. You can doubt your like faith. You could be a drunk. You could be a flagellant where you like hurt yourself for your faith. A gambler, lustful, a sadist. You could secretly be a witch, which I think is great. Slovenly, or be a werewolf because you're wolf bitten. I love these. And they all have special rules that will like take place during the game and cause you to be a little less reliable while you're playing. So like for instance, a doubting character has begun to question the very existence of God. Whenever they're required to make a resolve test or quote scripture, or when intimidated, they have to roll 2d10 and always use the lowest. So they're basically at disadvantage whenever they're testing something that has to do with their faith. And these are fun. The gambler one has an actual like event table, which I think is great. After the hunt, they must stake their entire bounty and any other earnings on a roll of a d10. On a 1 or 2, you lose everything. On a 9 or a 10, you double your original bounty. So it could be great. It could not be good, though. You could just lose all your cash. I think it's fantastic. And then lustful. It's just a woodcut of 2 people making out. Oh, fantastic. Just no notes. It's fantastic with great little like bits and pieces. He does pepper in some sort of like what would the word be? Historical facts and stuff here on the side, which I think is fun too. News from Scotland in 1591. It happened that this gentleman, being unmarried, had a brother who went to school with said doctor, and calling his scholar to him demanded if he did lie with his sister, so he would obtain for him 3 hairs of his sister's privities. At such time he should spy best occasion for it. What? It's so stupid. It's just people accusing people of doing stuff. And then some more woodcuts of like folks getting tested if they're witches or not. Then you get your money and equipment. So like you start a little bit, again, like a Forbidden Psalm style, like warband game. You'll start with a certain amount of money. So you have D10 plus 10 shillings if you're a gentleman. Otherwise, all characters start with 20 plus D10 shillings. Somewhere between 21 and 30. And the gentleman gets the bonus of 10 plus D10. So you have like 2D10 plus 30. And you spend these on your equipment. So things like swords, daggers, warhammers, crossbow pistols, like everything can be purchased. And depending on what you're hunting, you might have various uses for what's in here. The rest of this section is kind of devoted to the rules for all of these. And the equipment actually takes up a significant amount of the book. And then we get into gameplay. When we activate, now this is kind of, this reminds me a bit of, if you guys have watched me play, this is not a test. Activation rolls happen, and this is kind of, instead of having a morale system in the game, this represents sort of your combat effectiveness. And as you get more wounded, obviously, right, your activation tests become harder to do. So whenever you activate, you make an activation test rolling 2d10 and applying modifiers. Each time that equals or exceeds your modified resolve allows them to carry out an action. So normally, right, you could get 2 actions. If your resolve is a 4+, 2d10, 4+ for each one. Each one's an action you can do. The penalties start to stack the more wounded you are. And this is your, like, instead of running away, it's do you freeze up and just roll around in terror. Failed activation rolls, any dice that are lower than your modified resolve value cannot be used to carry out actions. If both of them fail, this will result in the hunter remaining where they are, frozen by indecision, doubt, and fear. Universal activation has modifiers. +1 the character standing within the light radius of a torch or other light source. -1 per wound. -1 if you're in base contact with a monster. And -2 if you're currently charmed, if someone has, like, bewitched you. And then each of your attacks, like I said earlier, they're basically tied to your stats. Like attack is 1, climb is 1, concentrate, which allows you to get a +2 modifier to something. So like if you're shooting or trying to solve a puzzle, interact, move, sneak, which is a sneaky move. and then handing equipment to people. Quote scripture. Quote scripture can be used to attempt to drive away the devil's minions. To quote scripture after a monster, the monster must be within 6 inches and pass a resolve test with a -4 modifier. If successful, the monster will react immediately with a flee action. His run away. And then shoot your guns. And then from here on, we have what we do when we play a game. So like the resolution of stuff, and the creation of a game itself. Like there are some rules for things like the innocence on the table. So like if there's people sleeping in a house or whatever, then what do you find? So you'd roll on the table and be like, a family of 3 innocents is found by a monster. 2 are slaughtered and 1 flees 6 inches from the door furthest from any monsters. Like what's going on in that house? Could be terrible. We have our bestiary, ghouls. What else do we have? And like their action tables. What they can do when they activate. Right? So it's you against the game, and the game is going to be, the random actions of monsters. Lots of good examples in here on how to activate too, and how to like solve things that are contradictory in your priorities. And then how to set up a game. So how to place terrain. So for this one, you're gonna be playing on a 2x2 board. So it's a nice, intimate, small size game. It's gonna be fun when we finally get around to so one of the format things we'll talk about is I'm gonna do 4 of these a month, right? You guys will be able to vote at the end of each month for the game I try next month, and we'll roll that and keep that going forward too. Divide the table into 9 8-inch squares, numbered 1 to 9, and then for each terrain feature roll a d10. Results of 1 to 9 must be placed, so at least half the feature sits in that square. Results of 10 can be placed anywhere on the table. So basically, you're going to have 9 pieces of terrain, and you roll to see where they go. And then we have all our scenarios. So this has got, it's funny because I see this as like the Ari Aster game, right? We get to go to the witch and have like a small farmhouse with Black Phillip on it where he's the monster and he kills everybody, but nobody shows up to save them. And each of these scenarios is sort of a trope like that. What is in the table? What are they hunting? And how does it behave and how does it act? So a little Silver Bayonet-y, but much smaller warbands and much smaller groups of monsters. So the stakes are a little bit higher. Yeah, and then there's literally an All Hallows Eve, like a Halloween one. And then a little more of the example stuff. So the Liebermann Storm gives you like examples of like what would these monsters look like and where are some good examples of miniatures to get from. And this part might be my favorite part of the whole book because a lot of indie games just focus on the rules, the mechanics, and the story. They don't focus on the hobby side. And having Devilry Afoot basically add in a hobby element where it's like, it widens the on-ramp of accessibilities to people that don't normally indie game. A lot of people, this is something I'm constantly battling with, is like most people haven't been playing miniature games as long as me, and I just kind of bulldoze over and assume, well, everybody knows where to get, a ghoul model or a hellhound model, or know all of these like small independent, workshops or STL creators. That's just not the case. And that can make games like this feel opaque. So having a whole section dedicated to this, I think they did a really smart thing here. Basically saying like, hey, in our bestiary, we're also going to give some examples of what these look like and a company that makes a model that kind of fits the bill, right? It's like your Outlaws in here for Bloody Miniatures. They might not have been, I thought they were Firelock, but they might actually be whatever this company is, Bloody Miniatures. I was guessing. I love the red caps, little Highland Miniatures. If you ever read the Brian Froud, Brian Froud did 2 of these, but there was 3 like big heavy coffee table books in like the 80s and 90s, and I have all 3 of them, but they're basically fairies, gnomes, and giants, and they were like fantastically European creature, like they're almost like encyclopedias, and 2 of them were illustrated by Brian Froud. The fairies one and the gnomes one, I think, was also, maybe it was just the fairies one, was Brian Froud. Brian Froud's the artist that did all the concepts for Labyrinth. So like worked with like Jim Henson Company and stuff like that. Is a very cool artist. His goblins are very notable, but this red cap reminds me of the Brian Froud red caps in the Fairies book. And so like giving examples of, again, all the stat lines for people and then what they do. I love the Spectre with the cut off head, like great miniature. And that's it. So the bestiary is how do all of these monsters function? What is sort of an example of what they look like? And then we got our rosters and stuff at the bottom here. Some quick references. And we're done. Also, giving a example of other games written by Nick Wright and published by Ganesha. and then his own Irregular War stuff too. So very well sort of like established writer, and you can tell this from the layout and the writing. As I kind of showed you earlier, tons of great miniatures already painted for this. There's clearly, it's got quite the following. So if you decide to dig into this, I think you'll pretty easily find examples of what people have been making that will look cool and, you know, set up your imagination for doing it yourself. Love all this vampire stuff. And some lovely warbands and stuff as well, of like various miniatures people painted. All credits to the artist. So I'm going to dive back in and check out what's going on in the chat after this little review. And we'll see what everybody's saying. Because I haven't been paying attention to the chat. I've been just doing this, which is this is new and different for me. All right. Yeah, so basically, Joseph Vinsky, Patreon popular demand, so Trench Crusade every week. No, we do each one once. Malev says, Dan's book's 100 pages. Can somebody actually write longer miniature skirmish games than me? Well, I shouldn't even joke. I know the size of Reality's Edge. Reality's Edge is a lot. And she says, Fantastic Battles is really well laid out too. I personally prefer clean rule books. It's a game manual first and foremost. I love when there's a separate fluff book and rules book. I think this one does a good job of separating all those things, where you have the rules in its own sort of like meaty chunk. And there, so I should mention, there is a printer friendly version. What's all the rules that you get separately? So you get a printer friendly version without all the art and the photos in it. The digital version I just showed you, a separate file for rosters, and a quick reference sheet separately in the download. So all of that stuff together is going to, you know, basically give you options for printing the parts that you want to have. You don't have to print just the rulebook in one place, which is again a good shout, I think, for like just making this accessible, because you're gonna have different ways of interacting with the product now that you've bought it. Ryan Envy says a hobby section is 10,000% something more games should do. A nice looking book. Yeah, I thought that was cool. And she says also, I just watched Warlock, so this is ringing very true. Oh my God, Warlock is a sleeper movie from that era. I love that movie. And it would be perfect inspiration for this. Also, I think it's Flight of the Navigator is another one from that era where they're like escaping, not Flight of the Navigator, something the Navigator. Flight of the Navigator is the one that's like a Disney movie. It's like, I think it's just the Navigator, but it's like this group of like kids trying to escape the plague in like Dark Ages medieval Europe. And this guy keeps having visions of the future of like gloves holding onto something and then somebody falling. It's a very cool, weird dark movie. Remember, if you make the font big and the picture's cool, Malev, you can have a 124 page rulebook real fast. I promise you. It is not hard to do. And then Just Vinsky says, game rules are great for competitive games, but give me a reason to play. That's what's being lost from major game companies. I agree. And then Dan Fox says, I think the original artist that made these woodcuts may not be with us anymore. They probably aren't too upset with their art being used. That's true. And then Gene Dean says, this reminds me of Warhammer Circles the Old West. It does actually, yeah. And then Anchise says, my toxic gaming traits, I always want to convert everything to centimeters and play in 15 mil. It's not a bad idea. And again, if you just stick to a single scale, I think that's perfect. All right, so let's get back to something completely different, and we are going to check out our game that I believe deserves more hype this week. This is 2022, published by #28mags, Lobsterpot. And if you know anything about the #28 sort of like art style movement, this was like the counterculture response to Games Workshop and Warhammer moving into sort of a non do-it-yourself era, right? The era of like making your own miniatures and converting things and creating your own little worlds had started to kind of fade, I think, in the mass market Games Workshop hobby. And Lobsterpot is an outgrowth of that through this like #28 movement. It started with Inquisitor 28, which was kind of a follow-on to the Inquisitor game. And this ethos kind of came out of Inquisitor, where it was an idea of doing everything for yourself, right? Inquisitor was a game where even the rules were like agree upon them with your opponent. However many 4+s you can roll is how many things you want to do, and your imagination is how many things you can do during the course of a game. So in a complete like reversal of the last thing we just looked at, Lobsterpot is a very rules light 28 millimeter skirmish set in the world after all the witches get killed. So the witchfinders and their lackeys chase shadows and eye each other with suspicion. Long ago, there was a great persecution of witches, followed by a cataclysm which warped the world and its peoples. Or maybe the cataclysm happened first. What legends and documents survive are contradictory at best, and no two villages have the same account of the time that led to now. It's only known that something's to be feared, and it's probably lurking right around the corner. Basically, the witches were holding everything back, and now we're in a Cthulhu-esque dark time where families look like this. And this is generally the art style that we're looking at. Think Shadow over Innsmouth. Think the idea of like, you know, a really dark, soggy, Ari Aster the Witch world, but the witches were the things that were stopping whatever the darkness is from coming through, and the darkness is very much through now, and this is what the world looks like. So again, I love this. I love the idea of like this. Oh, sorry, so a whole other game that we're gonna look at later, the Weald. I'm gonna look at the Weald probably when we look at Mike's game. But Lobsterpot is a rules light game, 28 mil, where, you know, this is inspired by the witch trials, but it happens afterwards, and we're in like a kind of Lovecraftian horror scape now of folk sort of like terror. And again, this is a much shorter rulebook, so we're talking about like sub 35 pages for this whole thing. Played on a 12 by 18 inch board. I kind of love this, a 1 by 1.5 foot board. So take the intimacy of a 2 by 2 board and almost divide it. It's less than half the size. So a really small scale game where you really focus on the miniatures and what stuff sort of like, what stuff feels like. You have a very small landscape to deal with. And so you can take your time and kind of make it exactly the way you want it to be. Up to 6 models per player. And up to 6 models to represent monsters, 3 to 6 pieces of terrain, some 6-sided dice, pencils and paper, and some tokens. So you get your patrol, which is the people that are out to kind of, save the day and protect the village. You've got enemies and monsters, which are the things that are not in your patrol. And then these are just the rest of the sort of like core mechanics. It's a D6 based game. Modifiers add to your dice roll. D3s are half of a D6. A natural is when you roll something without any modifiers. And then a success or failure is fixed. Every 5+ on a D6 is a success. After applying modifiers, every 4+ is a failure. So you have a 1/3 success rate on everything sort of raw. And then your equipment, your skills, how you are will dictate whether or not you can succeed, with your pluses and minuses. So already kind of a pretty hopeless game mechanic. And you got to understand, this is a free game. This is just free on the #28mag website. It's as stripped down as it could possibly be. So you kind of already need to be in the 28mag universe of Lobsterpot and see the art and stuff to get inspired. The game itself is almost artistically bare bones. But again, a completely valid way of publishing a game. Set up, pick a scenario or roll one randomly. Follow the outlines to deploy your patrols. Place your traded tokens, monsters. Number the corners of the board and the middle of the long board with 1 to 6. And these are called haunts. So this is the reason for the odd game size. If it was 12 by 12, it would be square. This way you have all 4 corners plus 2 midpoints that are equidistant from each other. Then pre-game, put a desperation on each volunteer and put a desperation on each model for every mutation they have. For each model with a destiny keyword, add D6 to your dice pool. And you can see they're actually starting with how do you put down stuff to play a game. So this is my one sort of criticism in the layout on this. And there is, I think, a published version of this book you can grab as well, which does it a little bit differently. The collecting your stuff part doesn't come before the playing the game start. Some people like this. I personally prefer the collect your stuff together in between the setting up the game and the what do you need to play. And then rule of secrets. Everything but a model's name and class is considered a secret. So there is a fog of war mechanic in here that I really like. During the course of the game, players reveal their model's weapons, keywords, skills, mutations, and shames as they become relevant. So again, this thing has a little bit of that same DNA as the previous game, which I thought was cool, where everyone has like a flaw. They have perks, they have flaws. The flaws can be mutations and your shames as well. If you have a model that you like to activate in the fox phase, you have to reveal that model has the creeping keyword in order to do so. And the game turn is divided into 4 sets of steps. The first one's the initiative roll, so it's a d6 roll. Whoever rolls the highest gets to go first that turn. If you went first last turn, then you get to -1 to the roll. The fox phase, models with the creeping that may be activated during this phase. The player with initiative gets to activate the first miniature. The play continues back and forth with models that are creeping. And then the hound phase, any models not activated this turn so far can be activated. The player with initiative goes to activate the first miniature, and the phase continues until neither player has any models to activate or they decline to do so. And then finally, the hunter phase, models with the determined who have not activated this turn can be activated. The player with initiative gets to activate the first miniature and then goes back and forth. So basically, by having the phases broken up like this, what you have, it's a coded sort of like speed system for how fast or how stealthy models are. So stealth models tend to go first. You're kind of standing up, and active models go last. The hunter phase is the ones who are biding their time and waiting and being patient. And then finally, the end phase. Any effects that would happen at the beginning of the end phase happen, and then afterwards, any model from a patrol that has 8 or more desperation, that model is broken and removed from the board. So they just run away. So basically, you accrue desperation over the course of the turn, and that's your sort of like fear mechanic for taking off and leaving the board. When a model is activated, it can make up to 3 actions, and these are move, fight, cast, and effort. Some actions will require you to roll dice and count successes. Rolls of 5 or higher are successes, and 4s or lower are failures. Move actions. When a model makes a move action, move 2 inches in any vertical or horizontal distance. So because the board's so small, a move action is correspondingly shorter. You have your fighting actions, and models in range of the enemy in line of sight, they can fight. When they make a fight action, make an attack roll using d6s and adds other dice or modifiers for your skills, mutations, or weapons, and for every success, you make a defense roll. And then finally, defending. Sounds like Cash is something funny. He's laughing over there. Defending models make a defense roll by rolling as many d6s as the preceding enemy made in successful attack rolls. And if there's successes, you cancel it, basically. However, if any of the rolls are failed, the models then have to make a fate roll. So you roll to see how many successes are in the attack pool. They roll to see if they can cancel them with an equal number of dice. But everyone that isn't canceled, you got to make a fate roll for to see what happens to you. And then your fate rolls are, again, d6s. And the weapons will modify them. So on a 0, you're incredibly lucky and you're fine. On a 1 to 2, you're shaken, gain desperation. Remember, if you have 8 or more, you flee. On a 3, you flee. This model gains a desperation, moves away a number of inches equal to its desperation. So the further you're going to go, the more scared you are. And then 4 or more, you're broken, just taken off the board. So there isn't necessarily like a wounding mechanic. It's how much do you freak out by the situation or by how damaged you are and then run away. No one's fighting to the death. And I kind of like this from a thematic point of view. It's really hard to get people to fight to the death. Once people get messed up, they tend to just run away. At the end of the phase, of course, you have 8 or more desperation, you're immediately broken away from the board. Then you can cast, make effort. If the model's within a piece of a terrain with a skill, or it's carrying a token with a skill, they can make an effort action that lets you do something. It's like your interact action, basically. And then you get your rolls for terrain. Now, tokens are kind of like things that you can interact with. So torches, and then they can be used to like light things on fire or to see further. Trap tokens can hurt you or add your desperation. And then loot tokens can be carried off the board. And players gain 2 VPs for each loot token taken off the board at the end of the game. Monsters have separate rules from your models activating. And when your warbands are fighting like PvP, that's going to dictate how things happen. Monsters are like neutral models. It could be part of the scenario or could be the thing that you're playing if you're playing solo. They activate at the beginning of the fox phase because they're sneaky. They make 2 actions. Both are moved towards the nearest non-monster model, and then they attack. So this is like it's AI. And then monsters with no desperation, even if they have mutations, they never start scared because they know they're monsters. They're not worried about being ashamed of having mutations. And then you make your fate roll like anyone else. At the beginning of the end phase, if a monster has 4 or more desperation, it's broken. It's going to run away. And now we get into our collecting stuff. So again, a lot like Devilry Afoot, we pick our class, and you're either a witch hunter, witch finder, a lieutenant, a volunteer apprentice, or a loyal beast. And these are just sort of like they dictate what you get at the beginning of the game. So there's no currency really. You get your classes sort of like collection of stuff. So when you build a witch finder, you roll once on the witch finder, lieutenant, and volunteer tables to see what your perks are, and then you get 1 weapon and 1 shame. Your lieutenants will roll once on the lieutenant and volunteer tables, get a weapon and a shame. Volunteers roll on the volunteer table and get a weapon and a shame, and they start the game with a desperation. And then your apprentices, they get a weapon and a skill, and that's it. Quick study at the end of each game. If the model isn't broken, it gains a random skill from a random skill table. And if it's broken, it's removed from the game patrol permanently. So you only have one apprentice. It's like your cabin boy, basically. And if they get hurt, they just leave. And then a loyal beast is attacks if armed with a sword. It's basically it's your dog, but it could have tentacles or weird crab arms. And then it gets a shame and rolls once in the loyal beast table, which is its like animal skills. And then when you create your patrol, you get to pick a style for it too. So you have your like classes that you go through and fill out, and then finally, how do you fight and what are you trying to do is like your last thing. You have Manifest Destiny, where you pick your Witchfinder's weapon and results for the Witchfinder Lieutenant and Volunteer tables. Roll for their shame if you like, and if you like a mutation, and then roll weapons, skills, shames, mutations for everybody else. State the course, count the number of rolls you make on each table for your patrol, then distribute them accordingly. Pivotal moments, roll everything for each model individually, replace up to 3 results with choices from the appropriate tables, and then Victims of Fate, roll everything for each model individually, you get what you get, and then randomly roll for a boon for your group. And I like this. This is a little bit like your D&D character creation styles, where you pick a way of collecting your stats. This was a way of kind of tailoring your approach to how you want to play the game. And it has some like rules impact, but mostly it's just fun. It's fun to like get what you get and don't get upset. It's also fun to like be able to pick based on your model collection and hand things out so that you're like converting miniatures. And what I really like about this section, like game design wise, is it fits the ethos of 28. It's artistically motivating. You know what I mean? If you haven't converted your warband yet, then this can give you the inspiration to do so. If you have a bunch of models that you really want to use, you still have the sort of like wherewithal to tailor your group to be able to do what you want to do. And again, yeah, I like when rules reflect ethos, and this does that really, really well. We have all our tables, right? So like, what are your shames? Is it a fear, a sin, a crime, an affliction? And you should decide what they are. Write a sentence or two for each to suggest the depths of depravity and hypocrisy these characters have plumbed. And then you got your stuff like your weapons, your volunteer table. And these will give you like, are you creeping or determined? So when do you activate? So you'll randomly determine basically your volunteers, how fast they are. Are they sneaky? Are they standing up or slow? You get your Lieutenant special skills, your Witchfinder special skills, and your Loyal Beast special skills. Mutations. Now there's tons of these. You could have whiskers, you could have a tentacle, you could be able to throw ink, you might screech at people. And I think these are really reflective of the art. So if we look at the art for, this game, it kind of gives you an idea of where they're going with what all these mutations are. And there's some really great miniatures converted up for all this stuff that I think really reflect what they're going for as far as this game. Yeah, there's plenty of this stuff. I think, if you just do a quick Google, that'll inspire you to make your miniatures. And then how do you play? Rules for the keywords. And how you play is your scenarios. So there's a bunch of different scenarios here. There's solo and there's versus. So you can play this game 2 different ways. I'm excited there's a solo mode. I think having a solo mode baked in is fantastic. A stinking mess, rescue, sniffing season, disturbing plot, beneath the chapel, and bounty, and then the death of the author is the conclusion. You can play these in order, or you can randomly generate them for which one you want to do. I'm not going to spoil these too much, but basically they tell the story of your little community. And by the end of it, the death of the author is sort of the climax. Your monster index is a handy list of monsters you may need for your games. Some of the monsters required for these scenarios can be used to represent multiple monsters, so things like civilians, ghouls, seagull men, 3 medium animals, 4 small animals, a large monster, an axeman, and a bounty hunter. And these will give you what you need for the story. This is kind of a Joe McCullough-y thing where they say don't necessarily read ahead to spoil what's going to happen, but here's what you want to collect to have ready for when you're playing your games. And finally, thanks. There's a cool Discord. Get in the pot. So when you download this, you can click to go check it out. And if you want to just search the algorithm, Lobsterpot 28, Lobsterpot game, Lobsterpot mutants, and get in the pot are your searchable keywords. And that's it. The Lobsterpot. What I thought was maybe the most complimentary 2 games that I could possibly put together as far as our first outing into the GMG Indie Hour. So Yeah, let's just check in with the chat real fast. But once again, big thanks to Jez Hunt for suggesting Devilry Afoot and this format, because I'm excited to do this every week with you guys, and I think this will be a great new show for GMG to be able to showcase more things and just get more games out there for people to check out and see without having to be in physical print. It just gives a wider access to this stuff, because there's so much of it out there that we're just not checking out because there's only so many hours in the day. And I am but one man. So being able to do it this way, I think will help us to get through more of these in the future. So let's go back to the chat and see what's going on. And what have people been talking about while I've been talking? Because we're just about done the hour. Gene Dean says, Courier new font, the famous college cheat, and the font banned by almost all of my professors. That's so funny. Ryan Enfi says, is there a place to find more of the 28 content? I've searched this particular hashtag on socials, and it mostly just comes up with anime stuff. Okay. So hashtag 28mag is probably the hashtag you want to search for the community for 28 stuff, because that is going to take you to their Discord. Check that Discord link too, because that should take you to more of the stuff that you're looking for. And yeah, I think that the sort of like access to it is going to be through the magazine, because that seems to be where everyone's collected these days, community wise. There's a Facebook group too for 28 mag. And obviously there's the art of books as well, if you just want to get some inspiration, that I think Dave Taylor has helped 28 mag put together, where there's a ton of very cool artists from that community that you can check out. And she says, board this small, maybe it would work best for the grid or a hex board. Maybe. There are a couple games that are gridded like that. Actually, Warlord Ascendant uses a gridded board system where it's the grid is actually a piece of paper. So it's 8x11, and then you put two of them together. It's almost like making your own. And I finished one of them. I just haven't painted it yet. This will give me the reason to do that, actually. The idea would be that you could just draw it on a piece of paper if you wanted to, and then align them kind of like aligning a Warhammer Underworlds board. And then there'll be more of that, I think, going in the future. And she says, The Navigator and Medieval Odyssey was the movie Ash was talking about, I think. That is the one, yeah. I wanted to say Flight of the Navigator, and they're like almost the same era, which is very funny because I haven't thought about that game in forever. But again, it's like a Dark Ages. It happens while the Black Plague is happening. There's like burning plague ships and villages all of people like all dying. It's a very depressing movie, but it's extremely cool. So yeah, so there we go. We've gotten through our first two of these. Well worth checking out. They're linked in the video description for those of you guys watching this in the future. And big thanks to Jez Hunt for suggesting this and kicking off this idea. So now if you're a patron and you're on Patreon, what you need to do is go to the comments on this post, suggest the games for next week. I'll put the poll up because I don't know if I can add to a poll once I post it. You have until Friday. Yeah, you have until Friday to get your suggestions in. I'll take those suggestions Friday, put the poll up for the weekend, and then that means Monday I can do the live show, download the books, and have a read through them before we actually jump in and do the next one of these on Wednesday next week. And then for those of you who are watching this live, if you're here next week, the next one of these will be being recorded, so you'll be able to see the current week basically airing live on GMG, and then we'll be recording the next week's episode at the same time, basically, for you guys to check out. And I'm excited to do more of these. So yeah, I'm gonna put money on Trench Crusade just because I feel like everybody's just talking about it right now. So doing a quick like run through of the Trench Crusade rules is probably something that's going to be something everybody suggests. If it's not, I think it's very funny, but yeah, we can check out other things too. And then Jeannie says, I want a game now for Flight of the Navigator. Who doesn't? That sounds fantastic. Where like a weird silver sphere kidnaps a child. Imagine that Amber Alert. Imagine the Flight of the Navigator Amber Alert. What those cops had to go through. Like, oh no, this silver bean kidnapped a child and now we have to try and get it in our Crown Victorious. It's probably not great. And Jesus says there's no restrictions. Any restrictions on rules, age, size, etc. No, I mean, just that it's digitally available, and because like that's how the format we're gonna do. And if it's digitally available and that you think it deserves more of attention, and then I'll pick one that I think needs more hype. So I think we have I don't think we're going to run out, guys. I think there's going to be so many to check out. It's going to be crazy. But what I'll try and do is I'll try and keep it like themed like this week. So once the vote goes out for the one that we're going to do, I'll try and pick one that needs more hype that's kind of to the same theme. And that way people have multiple options for like the same sort of like miniature collection. I think that's what was cool about this week is we had literally you could use this, like you could make your more mutated witch hunters and have them be in Lobsterpot, and both of these monster collections would basically overlap if you wanted them to. So you can kind of do both. And Captain Ferret says we could review dead games like Old World or Legions Imperialis. Shots fired. Hot take from Captain Ferret today. And then Ryan Murphy says, great honor content, 2 great looking games. Yeah, I'm excited about this. I think this is going to be cool. And then Ryan Murphy says, time to start suggesting old 15 mil games. Just pair up with Greg. Greg will definitely be demanding at some point that we do a review of Grunts. And Gene Dean says, Sunshard Enbren. Yeah, I think I should because Chris was telling me about that too. I'm excited for that one. Ronnie says Grunts Appreciation Week. Yeah. So many possible games. All right. Well, there we go. We went through our first hour. And we do this next week. I'm excited to get this format going. Captain Ferret says 100 games in the one box challenge, 4 years of content, easy. Not sure that would count as indie though. Nick Butler says time to review Silver Bear Red Moon when it's re-released. I know. Yes. If it ever gets re-released. That's Nick shouting out. This was from a live stream like 3 weeks ago. We discovered Silver Bear Red Moon, which was like a really, really, really proto tabletop war game, fantasy tabletop war game from like the late 70s. And she says Hordes of the Things is a hot new indie game from the 90s. Yeah. Could we do Fairy Meat? Maybe I'll do Fairy Meat and see what people think about that. Fairy Meat was the game of using lawn gnomes, like large 54 mil fairies that were all cannibals. It was fairy meat, fairy meat. It was fairies all eating each other. It was a fucking nightmare, that game. Your house became haunted by like large lawn ornaments that were all supposed to be killing each other and you. Captain Ferret says I still have a Fairy Meat mini in its blister. Yeah, they were insane. Nick Butler says I asked Chaos Team when they're re-releasing it. Oh, crazy. That's really funny. Gene says I heard someone call Warhammer 40,000 the granddaddy of all war games, and I was angry. It's not a granddaddy of all war games, but it's definitely the granddaddy of pop culture wargaming. If something was going to break through before that, they had lots of years to do it, and they didn't, and it managed to. So while I won't say that it's genetically the granddaddy, it certainly has the success of many, many years of being like in the zeitgeist and just stealing basically ideas so that it could cobble together something that everybody ended up liking. All right, well, there we go. Thanks to all my patrons for hanging out. Get yourselves to the post and start suggesting games. We'll put together the vote for our primary game for next week, and then that will let me get an idea of what I'm searching for as far as the complimentary game. And yeah, go check out Devilry Afoot and Lobsterpot because Lobsterpot's free. Devilry Afoot is like $9 on Wargames Vault, and you get a whole lot of game for not very much money. And you could definitely use your miniature collections from other things for this. You could reskin Devilry Afoot to be on like in a medieval imperial world in Warhammer 40,000. Lobsterpot could be the same thing. It could be in High Volcus, no problem. We could play all of these games. If you are an indie curious wargamer out there who hasn't really stepped out of the mainstream pop culture games, your miniature collection will already play these games, right? You can find miniatures in the Games Workshop range to easily play all of this stuff. There is no door keeping you out, I guess is what I'm saying. So we'll see you next week for the next one of these. And yeah, and the as you watch this live, if you're in the future next week, then the new one will be being recorded and you can check that out on Patreon. So have a great day, everybody, and I'll see you later.